Hey artists, my name is Nicole Watson and I am back creating another page in this amazing mixed media journal. For this video, I decided to use the matte Duralar page and create some magic with it, and I'll get into how it's magic in just a minute. I wasn't quite ready to create directly into the journal yet, so I grabbed one of the Duralar matte pads and did a little bit of playing. You can see I tried out a stencil there. On the right, I tried out some of my concept trees that I ended up using, but this gave me a good chance to kind of just play with this since it was new to me, and I'll use those little bit experiments in some collage so it's not gone to waste. I'm also using this computer graphics film that I printed on. I decided to play with it a little bit. I printed a blueprint. I used the blueprint first, and then I had this ledger page that I had scanned because I loved it so much, and I thought, oh, this would be fun to print as well. And then I printed some images. This is what I'm actually going to use in my journal. The photograph, the back of the photograph, another photograph, and then I just typed some numbers because I thought, oh, this is cool. I can make some of my own text. So this is the photograph, and it's really neat because I really wanted to use the handwriting on the back of the photo too. And so these products from Grafix are going to give me the opportunity to not only use the photo, but use the cool little story and handwriting on the back as well. Kind of wanted to honor not just the photo, but the sentiments that the lady wrote behind and keep the journal page pretty simple. I want to use the original photo on my journal page, but having this clear version of it kind of proved to be helpful in my process here. I'm going to use it for like a placeholder, I guess would be the right word, to kind of see how the photo is actually going to look on the front of my page, since I am going to use this sepia India ink and a glass calligraphy dip pen to draw a tree on the back side of the page. In my experimenting earlier, when I was playing with just the plain matte Duralar page and not in my journal, I discovered that I really liked how the tree I drew looked. When I flipped the page over, it looked more muted, a little bit more like old to match the photo, and I just really liked the look of it first. I like how that matte Duralar really kind of just pushed the trees into the background. And so now you're going to see me drawing a couple trees here on the back of the matte Duralar. I fast forwarded it about 8 or so times because it's kind of a slow process, but basically I just had fun drawing this tree with my sepia India ink. It dries pretty quickly on this Duralar, and because I'm using a permanent ink, it is permanent on the back as well, which is super helpful. If you've never sketched out a tree before, one thing to keep in mind is that as the branch hits the trunk, it's a little bit more wide towards the trunk and skinnier on the top, so it's kind of helpful when you create your tree. If you have a branch that just doesn't look right, look at the proportions. Chances are you probably have it just proportioned a little bit differently. So right now I'm just kind of using this India ink at full strength, just really drawing the tree and adding some little plops or little squiggles for the leaves. And then as I work now, I'm adding some of the squiggles out a little bit further so they get a little bit more diluted, adding to some like more dimension to the tree itself. I'm kind of thinking that my photo is going to cover up both of these trunks, and I kind of place the photo a little bit differently, but I'm using the photo itself and then I flip it over to kind of just test it out, see what I want to do. I kind of saw in this case that I didn't draw this trunk down far enough, so I'm just adding to the trunk. And then I'm going to flip it over a couple more times, look at it, and just clean up some areas that I thought maybe a branch needed to be extended or the leaves needed to be drawn a little bit more. When I flip this matte Duralar over, you can see the cool, like muted kind of tone that these trees get and how neat it is that I'm able to draw on the back side, flip it over, and it kind of blends in with the photo a little bit more and makes it push into the background, which is what I want. I want the trees to extend the photo onto my page, but I don't want them to be in the foreground and in your face. So the cool magic of this matte Duralar is that I can draw on the back, flip it over, and have that really neat muted effect of those trees, which really matches that photo perfectly. I'm just adding a few final little twigs and leaves here to finish off the trees, and then I'll move on to the next step. Maybe you noticed on my little experimentation page that I added a white paint and a creamy paint behind my trees. In the end, I decided I liked this Titan buff the best, and I'm adding it on the back side, the reverse side of my page behind the trees, for a couple of reasons. This is helping kind of mute those trees and blend them in with that kind of old sepia toned photograph that I'm using, and also because I'm going to add a ledger page behind. The lines of the trees are going to kind of fight with the lines on the ledger page, and I wanted to kind of allow them to kind of come forward a little bit and not compete with all that wonderful handwriting on the ledger page. So I'm using this Titan buff paint here to back the trees a little bit to allow them to stand out a little bit more and not compete with that ledger sheet. My goal here is to add it a little bit stronger towards the center of the trees and then feather it out with a little bit of water so it really looks kind of blended onto that ledger sheet and not like it's like paint and then ledger sheet, if that makes sense. Because I'm kind of moving the paint a little bit too much, I decided to dry a little bit of it quickly. I'm using the cool setting on this hairdryer so that I don't ruin this plastic Duralar, and just quickly drying a part of it before I get working on it again. I'm just going to add a little bit more darkness of that paint in the center and allow it again to feather out towards the center. When I flip it over in a little bit, I'll see that I have it concentrated a little bit too much on those trunks, and I'm going to add a little bit of water and feather it out. Just a few watery ink splatters here again to allow it to kind of meld into that ledger sheet that I'm going to add. Now I'm grabbing a ledger sheet that I'm going to back these trees with. If you don't have an old ledger, I really think a book page would look just as good. And in fact, I think I'm going to use a book page on my next one because I think that that type would be really neat in the background of one of these pages as well. And I'm just lining it up here, trying to decide how to center the ledger on my journal page to get it how I want. I brought out my trimmer here just to trim off the edges so that it's straight, because I know that if I don't get this lined up on this see-through page, it's going to be really obvious. So I wanted to make sure that the page was cut straight. So my next step is going to be to rip this ledger sheet horizontally, because I want the bottom of it to be in front of the Duralar and the background of it to be behind the Duralar, so that the front of it looks kind of like the grass and the foundation of the trees and the house, and the back is going to be totally in the background. I love the effect that this gives. It's really, really subtle. You don't really notice it, but if you look closely, you do. And had the ledger sheet been behind with the photo, it wouldn't have stuck out as much. So I really like how this kind of really subtly adds a horizon line to the page and a background to it as well. So I'm using matte medium to adhere this ledger sheet to my page for the main reason is that I want it completely sealed. I'm going to add, I'm not sure, spoiler alert, I know what I add, but at this point I don't know what I'm going to add on top. I'm either going to add some paint to it, some more ink, and I want the fibers on this page to be completely sealed so that whatever I add on top of it doesn't sink in, and I can move it around with lots of water. Had I not used a matte medium, whatever I would have used would have like sunk into the page and feathered out and not given me that look that I wanted. I'm also going to use matte medium when I secure it to the back for the exact same reason. I don't know what I'm going to create on the other side. Most likely it's going to involve a lot of watery, puddly paint like I like to use, and so this again assures that this ledger sheet is completely sealed and then I can create on top of it with ease. I use a lot of matte medium for this. I probably squeezed a little bit more than I wanted or needed to out of my bottle, but it's okay. I wanted to make sure that it was secure onto the Duralar. I wasn't sure, how it would take it as well, so I wanted to make sure I had enough adhesive. I ended up pulling a lot of it off and wiping it on my paper there. You probably don't need as much as I used, but make sure you have a lot so that it's secure to your page. And then I'm sorry, it's off camera here a little bit. I'm going to flip it over in a minute. Sometimes when I get creating, I forget to look up and see that I'm off camera. But I'm just going to line this up. So where I ripped it, I'm going to line the page perfectly up there so that it looks like, again, I have my horizon line there with my foreground and my background of that ledger paper. So I used the matte medium in the front and the back, and that paper is soaked with matte medium. I'm just going to set it up for just a tiny bit because I don't want it to stick to the paper, and let it dry. And once it dries enough that it's not going to stick to my background paper there that I'm using underneath, I grab an old gift card and just kind of pull it around on the page to make sure that I have that matte medium just spread throughout so there aren't any puddles or things that would look funny, again, because the page is see-through. I'm just using the edge of the journal page to rip off that excess on the top. And because my ledger sheet covers up some of the holes on the edges for the little spiral rings that it's going to tuck back into in the journal, I'm just clipping them and clipping that extra little paper out of them so that it easily goes back inside the journal. And now I'm going to create my little next bit of magic. Like I had said in the beginning, I really wanted to showcase the handwriting on this photo, but if you're going to use the original photo, you're going to cover it up. So I thought the perfect way to showcase this handwriting and the little story that the lady wrote would be to put it on top of the photo. So I printed it, I scanned it first, changed it to black and white because I wanted it to be black and white, and I think she had written in blue. Or it wasn't totally black. It wasn't the right color for the photo. Cleaned it up a little bit, printed it out, and now I'm going to put it on top of the photo. So my favorite line of this writing says, "This is the little place I've bought." It also talks about who else is in the photo, but I love her little line, "This is the little place I've bought." And that kind of leads to my purpose or the story that I'm telling with this journal page. Then I also thought that my page needed something else, so I used that ledger sheet that I had printed with those splotches on to show, oh yeah, something else on this page would be really cool, and I decided it needed just some birds that were flying off that tree. So I used this tissue paper from Dina Wakley, which I thought would be great because the matte Duralar is kind of like the similar color to that tissue. The tissue is supposed to disappear when you use it with matte medium, but I find that sometimes it doesn't, and I thought that this cloudy, matte Duralar, which is really similar to the tissue, would be perfect. I cut as much of the excess tissue paper that I could around those trees, and now I'm just using matte medium, again front and back, to stick it down to the front of my journal page. Again, I got a little bit more matte medium than I needed on this page, so I just grab a baby wipe and wipe off the excess around the birds. I didn't know if it would leave like a funny film around them because of the properties of the Duralar, and I just wanted it to be clean, so I just wiped off any excess with that baby wipe. So my page is looking kind of one note, kind of monotone, all similar colors. So I grabbed a little bit of white gesso to put around the edges of these birds just to add a little lightness to this page. I have the dark, the sepia color of the ink, I have the black birds, I have the mid-range of the Titan buff and the ledger sheet, but I don't have like a really light color. So I'm just adding a little bit of highlighting here, a little bit of brightness, by adding some gesso around these birds. I'm using a paintbrush with some watered down, using my finger to kind of feather it out. And I'm going to also add it a couple other places on the page so it looks a little bit more purposeful and it's not just around these birds. In just a second, I'm going to grab my photo again, put it down, and see how it looks. In doing this, I realized that I got maybe just a little bit too much gesso in places, and because it's not completely dry, I'm going to remove some of it with a baby wipe. And last step with that gesso is just to add a few little splatters of it watered down, and I wiped away any that ended up in places that I did not want them. As much as I wanted to keep the entire frame around this photo, it was just too much. It was taking away from the background, taking away from the photo, so I'm just using a scissors here, trimming off some of it. I'll set it down and look at it and trim off a little bit more. But I felt so good when I set it down because I really didn't want to trim it. I love the big frame around it, but when I set it down, oh, there was like this relief inside of me that it was okay that I trimmed it, and oh, how much better it looked without that excess frame around it. So I'm really feeling this page needs something else. I grabbed a few stencils and I had some paint colors in mind, but my first thing I wanted to do was just add a little bit of walnut ink. This is the Daniel Smith walnut ink. It didn't have much left in it, so it dried out into little crystals. So if you buy this walnut ink, know that it's liquid, and I'm just reactivating those crystals with a little bit of water. I'm going to grab my foam applicator here, and this stencil, it is, I don't remember the name of it, but it's like Coffee Stains, and it's by StencilGirl. And the point of the stencil is just to add this walnut ink around, but not necessarily to stencil perfectly. I just want to add some distress and some aging to this page. But sometimes when I do that on my own, I overthink it, and using a stencil to kind of aid in that process allows me to just really freely add the paint or the walnut ink to my page and not overthink it. Because I sealed my page with that matte medium on the bottom, it's going to float on top and not completely soak in. So the most important part of this step is just to grab a stencil. It doesn't really matter what it looks like. Maybe you want some circles, maybe you want something smaller, something larger, and you can kind of see those coffee rings a little bit, but you really can't see them overall. I actually pick up the stencil and I stamp with it to get the excess off, to add more of that walnut ink around. I'm going to pick up my photo here again and see how it looks, see if I need to add any more. Decided to just grab my paintbrush and just add a little few spots of color where I felt like it needed it, so that it didn't look like it was just in random places, but made it try to look a little bit more purposeful maybe. And I picked up that stencil again to add a few more rings on the bottom. This time I used my paintbrush to paint in center of them just because it was in my hand, no other purpose. So if you don't have a foam applicator, same process with a paintbrush works as well. The cool thing about something really watery like this walnut ink is that it soaks under the stencil and it creates, you know, a really cool grungy look. That's why it doesn't totally matter what stencil you use, because you don't 100% see the stencil. Next I grabbed this manila tag. It's like I'm going to say it's like a 2x3 size maybe, and I'm using some of that walnut ink on it to distress it up and to age it. The tag isn't sealed, so the walnut ink is really soaking in, and so I'm going to have to use a couple layers here to get a more diverse color range, so I get some darks and lights. I have to wait for the ink to soak in really good and then layer on top of it. And while I'm waiting for that tag to fully dry, I'm going to grab this Artist-tac and add a little bit of it to the edge of that quote or handwriting letter that I printed off with the graphics film. And I'm only doing the edge of it because I want it to stick just slightly to the photo so that you can lift it up and look at the photo and not miss out on all of the details of the photo. And so I was kind of additioning it here on the page. I had played with it earlier and there was a spot where I put it on the photo and you could still see, there it is right there, you could still see the lady, and it was important to me that the words didn't cover up her face. And so I didn't stick that fully down until I had it right in place, and then ran my finger over it and made sure it was super sticky, and it's just on the edge there. You can see the little dots. That Artist-tac is really cool because it's just little dots. And now I'm going to use that again on the back of my photo to adhere it to the page. I really like using this Artist-tac, this dry adhesive for like photos and things that I don't need to completely seal to the page. Then you don't end up getting the wrong kind of thing on the front of your photo, and it's really cool. And it just adheres super well to the front of the journal page. So I was trying to think of how I could maybe disguise the edge of this photo where you could see the little dots of adhesive, and I thought, well, let's use a tag, which is why I had prepped it earlier. Now I just folded it over and I'm going to put it on front of my journal page. I'm going to use matte medium on the tag itself and stick it to the journal page and allow it to dry really well. I chose to use the matte medium because I wanted it to seal really good against the journal page on the front and the back, because again, I don't know what I'm going to create on the back side of this, and I wanted to make sure that it was solid to the page for whatever I put on top of it. Now that my page is mostly finished, it's time to add just a couple last steps. I added this really neat quote that I found that I felt like really fit the photo with what the lady had said, to dream all of the happy days and then home. I thought that was really neat, since this was the little place that she bought all by herself. And I also punched a hole in that tag, and I did that off camera. I don't know why I forgot to push record there, but you can see that I punched through that tag. And in a minute, I'm going to pick up some Sari ribbon and tie through that hole. Before I do that though, I'm going to grab my matte medium to make sure these stickers are stuck down to the page. I always do that on top of stickers just in case, because you don't want them to peel off. And here's that Sari ribbon. I just cut a little bit of it and I'm going to stick into the hole of the tag for just a final touch. And now that my page is finished, I'm just going to pop it right back into this journal with so much ease. It's so great. I love being able to remove these pages, work on them, and then put them right back into the journal. And you also just right there saw a sneak peek of my first page that I created in this journal. So if you haven't seen that video, it'll either be linked below or look for it on the Grafix channel or my YouTube channel as well. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this encouraged you and inspired you to get one of these neat Grafix Mixed Media Journals to explore and play on the pages and create some of your own journal magic.